Ramp, 20-minute long, or the 2x8. Which FTP test is right for you? Hey, we're going to break down the pros and cons of each. And is there one that's actually a king? Yes, and it might surprise you. Hey, we're going to get into that. Plus, we're going to answer questions from you guys from last week's episode. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to episode 4 of Bespoke Endurance. Josh and I are both recreational riders transforming ourselves into racers.
Let's go.
Hey, you know, a lot of cycling content out there is geared towards the pros, and we are not pro. We have full-time jobs, we have families, we have lots of commitments, so we are on a time crunch and trying to figure out how to balance life along with our family, along with getting really good at riding bikes. So if any of that interests you, then you are in the right place. Before we get into everything, we want to give a quick shout out to Road ID for hosting us. We were rocking our IDs. If you haven't checked out their website, you absolutely need to head over to roadid.com.
Yep.
Look, we ride and we train outside on the open roads with traffic. Allow your loved ones to have peace of mind when you are out training. If anything were to happen, that EMS and first responders can call the right people and get the right information and help save your life. You can also put your pre-existing medical conditions. So check out roadid.com, grab yourself a Road ID. We also want to give a shout out to the Kentucky Open Road Racing Series is partnering with us this year.
Oh, so exciting.
And we have a deal for our listeners and viewers. If you're looking to race in Kentucky this season, there's some local races. You can use the code Bespoke15 at checkout for 15% off your registration. Whether you are a seasoned racer or you are kind of like us getting into it, they have races for all levels.
Yeah.
It is a series-long race. There's 4 races starting in April, going all the way through August. And the coolest thing is not one course repeats itself. They are all different courses. The only thing that's the same is the start and the finish is in the same place. Every course is different. Awesome roads, awesome event, well-marked course, and well-run event. Head over to KentuckyORRS.com and use the code Bespoke15 at checkout. That's BESPOKE15.
Yeah. All right. So, man, I'm excited. Hey, this is 4 weeks into our training, and you just did your FTP test. I'm about to do mine Saturday. And I'm super pumped as we dive into these different types of tests. I really want to hear about your test and how it went. But I felt like maybe as we just out of the gate, so maybe if we've got people that are new to cycling or they've never really done an FTP test, I think it's just good to maybe start with a quick definition, right, of what the heck is an FTP test. And so just out of the gate, it is your functional threshold power, right? So think of this as like, this is your physiological measurement of closely linked to your lactate threshold. So all that means is that you've got your lactate in your blood, the point during the exercise where you're producing excess lactate to where your body has a tough time being able to clear it. And what that does is that fatigues your body much, much quicker. So if you think about it in terms of like, an analogy of like a car, right? So if you're in your aerobic system, your car is running where it's smooth, efficient, you're producing the right amount of efficiency at a low intensity, that's your aerobic zone, right? And then you have in your body, you have anaerobic system, which is your higher intensity. So like if you're driving a car and you're basically just absolutely hammering it, you've got this like, you might go really fast for a while, but eventually you're going to start producing a lot of unwanted byproducts. So that can be considered like your lactate, which is essentially just causing your car to eventually sputter and have a lot of issues because most cars are not designed to drive super fast all the time. So that's kind of the way I like to think about it. How do you like to think about it, FTP?
I've been riding for 9 years.
Here we go.
And I have no idea what you just said. I still get aerobic and anaerobic mixed up, like the two. It's not been until we've really started doing this that I'm starting to be like, I think anaerobic is the one where you're just in the red and dying.
Yeah, high intensity.
Okay.
Yep.
Also, I drive a hybrid, so your whole analogy breaks down.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with the hybrid analogy.
I always just say it's the amount of power that you can theoretically sustain for an hour.
Correct. Yep.
So it's the truest, most golden way to determine that is to go ride as hard as you can for 1 hour.
Correct.
And see what your power is, your average power over that hour.
Yep.
I only know 2 people who have successfully done that. Ever.
Yeah.
So it's not, I think the hard thing with the truest FTP test, there's just too many variables riding outside on the road.
Correct.
With stop sign, like not even traffic, just stop signs, stop lights, sidewalks, like braking, hills, elevation. You have to find just a hour-long stretch where you could just go.
Yeah.
That's really hard to do. Pacing is also really hard. So there are 3 tests you can do, whether it be at home or outside, that are a good enough measurement of your theoretical threshold.
Yeah. And I think it's a great way to preface it, because you're right. I mean, theoretically, it is really freaking hard to try and do that for a solid hour, right? Like, nobody wants to do that. If you're racing, great. But then you also have surges in your race too. So it's like, that's not even a consistent measurement, because it's like, that might be surges. But the thing is like, that's super helpful in the way that I've started thinking about this from like an FTP perspective. I've started getting interested in it over the last like couple of years, because to me, it's also like thinking about the whole point of this is to understand your training zones, right? And to be properly training in the right zones so that you can ultimately produce more power. So it's like, everybody wants to be faster. Everybody wants to have a higher, power when they're riding, right? But the thing is like, most people don't train in the correct zones, and FTP tests are really, really helpful to help you determine, hey, am I training in the right zones or not? So I think that's really cool to kind of just start out with out of the gate. And so,
well, hey, I would add on with that from a 100% agree with a training standpoint.
Yep.
I think that there's also it can be good and it can be bad stigma around FTP.
Yeah.
Where it's the golden measurement for a cyclist. So it's like, if you were a runner, the question is, well, what's your mile time or what's your mile pace?
Yeah.
For cycling, it's what is your FTP? Like, what can you, and you can unofficially kind of measure yourself up against someone.
Yes, it's true.
And people do it.
Yeah, all the time.
I do it. I don't want to, but I do. I'm guilty of it.
Hey, bro, what's your FTP? Okay, so I want to hear about your test that you did, but I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of people out there that probably have never done a 2x8 test. Mm-hmm. So our coach has us doing that. I'm doing mine Saturday, but you just did yours this past weekend. Yeah. I want to hear all about how yours went, but like, I think just it would be good to help other people understand that have never done a 2x8. Like, what is that test?
Yeah. So let's, with the exception to the hour-long thing that we mentioned, so let's take that off the table. So of the tests that we're about to mention, let's assume for a minute that there's a proper warm-up, and at some point in the warm-up, you're doing some type of, I think I'm gonna use it correctly, anaerobic to get your legs really moving. So taking all that out, at its core, the 2x8 test is 2 8-minute long intervals with a 10-minute rest in between. You do each interval at maximum effort, and after your second, you take the power of the 2 intervals and you average them. Yep. So for those who it's been a long time since you've done basic math, you add them up and divide by 2, and then that's your average, and then you multiply that by 0.9 to get your theoretical threshold.
Yep.
So yes, I just had my test last weekend.
Yeah, man, how did it go? I'm curious about this. Tell me how it went.
It went okay. It was my first time doing a 2x8 on a trainer with just straight, I've done 3 of them now.
Okay.
2 of them have been outside. I am finding, I'm getting a new theory where I want to start doing tests on some type of climb. Mm-hmm. And this can be maybe another discussion another time, but I do feel like I climb better. I don't know if it's something with the gearing and turning over the gears, but I feel like I do more efficient power output when I'm climbing versus on a flat section.
Okay.
But so this was the first time I've done it on a trainer. I was at the end, I was kind of bummed. Like I filmed it and we'll release a video of it, but like my reaction was like, oh, well, this sucks. Because like my FTP went down according to this test from what it was in November, when I know I'm more fit right now than I was in November. Yes.
Okay.
And so that left me a little bummed. I don't like to be one to make excuses, so I was just like, okay.
How was your pacing how was the pacing during both intervals?
Not good. I came in way too hot. So like Derek looked at my numbers and I was like coming in over 420, 430 watts in the beginning at one point. Not holding that, but just coming in.
Wow.
I think one of the things that helps me, and I didn't do this, is when I do a test, I like to see my average power.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that data. Mm-hmm. That helps me kind of mentally of like, okay, like
I'm too high.
I'm too high, I'm too low. Whereas like when it's just a number changing, it's harder to kind of focus on that. So, but like I said, I don't want to make excuses. I think I came in too hot. You were saying to me, you were sick last week coming off that, but maybe that affected me, but I don't feel like it did. Like I didn't feel overly fatigued or drained going into it. Like I felt like I had a good prep going into it. Originally we were both going to do it this week.
Correct.
And then because I got sick and I took a couple of days off, Derek was like, well, let me just kind of move your weeks around to kind of fit that and see how you do. So,
well, I'm curious about how did this compare? Because you've done the outdoor test, the 2x8.
Yeah.
How did this compare to the outdoor test that you did?
The outdoor test, I felt better on that one. The outdoor test where I ran into an issue was road conditions. There was a couple potholes and then had to slow down for some lights. So there is Did you stop your Garmin during that when you're slowing down for lights? How did you manage that when you're outdoors? I was lucky to catch the light, but I had to slow down. So I had to let off the gas, but I didn't have to completely stop and unclip.
Yeah.
At least I don't think so. I can't remember. This was like a year ago.
Okay.
But I mean, as far as the test goes, it was the test is one of those things. I don't think I've ever had an FTP test where I walk away and feel good mentally.
Yeah.
Like I always get discouraged but it kind of keeps me like, okay, I want to try that again. And where I kind of hold myself up is I look at what you said and I go, okay, this is just a unit of measurement for fitness.
Yeah.
I think of an FTP test as like a scale.
Yeah.
Where there is no perfect scale in the world. Like if I go to the doctor's office or if I go to my house, they might read different. But if I'm tracking weight loss, as long as I'm doing it on the same scale, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I think of an FTP test like that, where as long as I'm tracking it quasi-consistently or with the same unit, like to adjust my training zones, I think it's fine.
Yeah. What I'm also curious about the two is, because I'm thinking about this week for mine, is what was your preparation going into this test? Like do
you mean the day of? Do you mean the week of?
About, just give me a high level, like week of and then day of too.
Yeah,
like what's your prep?
Days of rest, couple days of easy riding. And then the day before did some openers.
Yep.
So openers, I think you're doing yours Friday.
Yep.
I think we're doing the same. So it was like what, 2.5 minutes at like threshold?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I truly haven't looked at mine yet. Okay. I don't know.
It was something where it got my legs moving, but I did not feel fatigued enough to be like, oh, I got to test tomorrow now. It felt like a good, really getting the body moving. So let's see. Monday I was sick all day, vomiting. So I was definitely off. No, believe it or not, I actually rode that day. I rode in the morning and then I got sick all day. So I somehow got a nice little hour and 15-minute easy spin. Took Tuesday completely off. Wednesday, I think I did an easy spin. Thursday, I took off, and then I did the openers on Friday, and then the test on Saturday.
Did you feel 100% on Saturday? Like, not sick?
Yeah. No, I didn't feel sick anymore. So I like as far as stomach bug, virus stuff that was going around here, I felt fine for that.
But what did you do in terms of like fueling, day of and day before? What did you do to fuel for this?
Fueling, I've been still trying to figure that out because I think we talked about this last week with the morning.
Yeah.
Just that's a whole new experience. So I have not locked in perfect fueling
In the morning.
yet.
Yeah.
Where, especially for an FTP test. So if I'm going outside and I'm going to meet up with people like you guys and I'm going to go ride for a few hours, I'll wake up and do like a peanut butter banana toast with honey. That's golden.
Yep.
But if I'm going to do an FTP test in 25 minutes, I won't put something that heavy down when I know my heart rate will be getting up too high and I'll feel like I have to throw up. So I think I did a gel, and then I always, for a workout like that, I'll do a high carb drink mix.
Yep.
So
Yes, you should.
I did my drink mix, 80 grams of carbs in a bottle. In the hour and a half, I don't drink the whole bottle in the basement. So roughly, let's say 50 to 60 grams in the bottle, and then a 20 gram gel of carbs. So I'd say about 80 grams of carbs. I didn't feel like underfueled or like redlining or like I need water or something. Like I felt good for that. So I felt prepared. I think I did a poor job at pacing. I don't know if that's a trainer thing. Like I've done the 20-minute test before in the trainer. So I don't know. It didn't go great for me, but I didn't walk away. I just kind of walked away from it thinking, okay. And I talked to Derek about this. He was like, if I was in your position, I'd feel the same way as you. Just trust that it's only January. Yeah. There's a long way to go. Yep. And it's
race season's happening in January.
Yeah, where it's not happening in January, there's plenty of time, and it's no different than if you have a bad interval session, it's not the end of your training season. Yeah. So it's like, even if I didn't have the best FTP test, that might not be a perfect measurement of where I'm currently at. Like I feel stronger than what the number was, especially because the number dipped since November, October, whatever it was.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, I think I think that to me makes a lot of sense in terms of, just it is always one of those things to where, like, if you had to pinpoint it sounds like to me you're saying, like, more than anything, it's probably a pacing thing. And it's like, I would still argue that, like, to me, I still feel like I don't know. It still felt like there was something about your sickness that I'm like, I just don't think I would have taken an FTP test when I'm sick that same week. However, if you felt fine about it and coach did, I mean, like, I just feel like that would be another thing that I would just always think of, like, I don't know, was I fully 100%, going into that test? Like,
I probably wasn't, but it wasn't in my mind the FTP test because it's kind of just a measurement tool. Yeah. It's not an actual race. Yeah. I just kind of looked at it. I was like, okay, like,
yeah, you didn't. It was nonchalant. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I kind of wanted, because I had a few days. I was kind of looking at it more from like a macro. So because I'd had a few days off that week, I didn't want to just have nothing to show for that week. I was like, oh, at least I'll do a test and push myself to have something to show of, like, because I've had these super easy rides. Yeah. But then, like, this week it's been I've done 2 sets of intervals already. I think I have one scheduled for tomorrow or Saturday. So it's been a tougher
week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was okay with it. I think the 2x8's a good. Do you want to get into who is this for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like, I mean, who do you think the 2x8's for? Like, I know what our coach said, so maybe I'll do that, because this is what Coach Derek. I asked him this question because I've never done a 2x8. Yeah. Like, I've done the 20-minute test and it was great. I've done it a couple times where I'm like, it's fine, but I've always done that one. Haven't done the ramp test. Probably won't ever, by the way.
You should try a ramp.
We're gonna get into ramp. I have some feelings towards ramp, but I think the thing with the 2x8 for me, what was interesting was, like, one of the things that he mentioned was, he was like, for him, it's like, he's like, this is both easier and harder than the 20-minute long test, because he's like, it's easier in the sense that, or easier in the fact that, like, you're literally breaking up your FTP, or you're breaking up that interval into, like, you're having a 10-minute rest period, right? Yes. And you're going at it for 8 minutes, but then you're resting for 10 in between. That's easier, 100%, right?
Yes.
It's more challenging, though, than the 20-minute, because you have to repeat that 8 minute 2 times. And so it's mentally, I think there's something to where you're like, okay, I finished my first 8 minutes. It's great. And then it's like, now I need to try and like recover. And then also now try and hold that again I want to get those numbers as close to humanly possible so that both of them are not like, I'm averaging, 300 in the first interval, and then the second interval, I'm down to like 250. It's like, that's not a good
Yeah, that's kind of how mine went. I came in too hot, and I would agree with that. The first one I was like, I feel good. I can do this. And then I hit the second one, and out of the gate within a minute, I can see, oh shoot, I'm not there. Yeah. And that's mentally hard, because then you're like, I got to try to fight through this for another 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So I would definitely agree to that part.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing too is like, when you think about the 2x8, to me, what's also interesting when he talked about the purpose of this too, is like, the goal is that you should have a consistent power between the 2 8-minute intervals. But it's like, if you're racing, it's like most races require a shorter amount of surging or an intensity, just like the 2x8s, to where it's less like a 20-minute. So I think in terms of like who this is for, like it's less taxing on your body than the 20-minute test. So like when you get done with this, it's like, if you're being coached or if you're training, I think this test is a really good measure to where you're not dipping as far into your red line maybe as the 20-minute test would. And I think it's also just one of those to where you're just like, in some ways, it's a really interesting test to kind of break up if you're like, hey, I don't really want to go really hard for 20 minutes. It's like 2x8s might be your jam, because you're like, hey, I can break this up, and mentally it's easier for me to do, and I can still get a pretty accurate result based on both tests. So.
Yeah, I definitely think, and if you even think to a super aggressive, racy type group ride, where it's like, for us around here, we have a Tuesday Night Worlds where it gets pretty spicy pretty quick.
Yep.
Even think about that, you're going to do let's say 3 to 4 minute climb, but then you come over the top and you want to take off and hold that. So that 8-minute power is like, for stuff like that, pretty critical to be able to sustain. So if you can make it to the climb, then do that 3 to 4. I even say we have a 5-minute climb around here. And then push on for another 3 minutes. That can really create a pretty good gap in a ride scenario like that.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I mean,
so how do you feel then about the upcoming test? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Like,
I'm good. I feel really good. I was posting a couple things. We'll link to them here on Instagram and TikTok and the YouTube Shorts. But it's like, I've been thinking about kind of 3 things with this. One is just a lot of rest this week. So like you said, 2 easy days of riding, 2 rest days. And it's like, I feel good, right? I feel like I have not done anything intense the last couple of days. And I feel my legs are like, they feel really good. So I feel good and rested. I think the thing I'm thinking about too is like the anxiety of it. I think there's so many athletes out there that maybe are like me, and maybe you guys are the same way, where it's just this idea of like, you build up this anxiety around an FTP, right? Especially as a cyclist, if you've been riding for more than a couple of years, you just heard other people talk about their FTPs. It's just this idea that you got to get rid of this stigma of like, hey man, if I have a bad FTP test, oh my gosh, dude, everybody's going to see this. Everybody's going to be like, dude, I can't believe that. It's like, when in fact, nobody really cares. I mean, it's like, it could you're the only one that cares.
You could have one and then go on a podcast and talk about how badly it went. Right. So it can't be worse than that.
Well, I think that's one of those things that like, it has such it's easy to build up anxiety around it. And I think that's one of those things that I'm really trying to, like, I've done it before, and I thought about it where I thought too much about this, where I'm just like, at the end of the day, this is to help your training zones. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's just a point in time. Like, your FTP can change over the course of 4 months. And so you're like, hey, you might have a poor FTP, but it's like, great. At least it's a measure in time then, so that you can say, cool, I want to get better. So I need to do this, and I need to train and keep going because I want my FTP to increase. So I've been thinking about that. I'm excited about it. I think the other thing I'm thinking about is just pacing. So the third thing for me is like, I really want to do a good job with pacing. So I've talked with our coach about this, and I think that's something I've struggled with in the 20-minute test when I've done them, where I've go in and I've like the first couple minutes, I'm going in way too hot. So I think that's something I'm trying to, like, the last FTP test I did, the 20-minute, I felt like I was the most consistent on my pacing.
When was that, roughly?
This would have been towards the summer of 2024. Okay. Yeah.
Do you, with whatever number came out of that, how do you feel right now as far as like a goal? Do you feel close to that fitness?
Yeah.
Way far off? Because you've been riding.
Yeah.
I mean, that was when you were training for a triathlon.
Yep.
So you've been riding way more.
Yeah.
The last month.
Yeah, the last month, it's interesting. I feel like, so my FTP in the summer of last year was 283 for the 20-minute long. Now, I was telling our coach, I'm like, I feel it's, I'll see what Saturday comes, but I'm like, I feel like I'm in that similar range where I'm like, feel good. I feel like my legs are fresh. I've got enough, where I'm like, I feel like the zones when I've been training this, where I'm like, yep, this feels pretty much like what this did in the summer of last year. So I don't know. I'll be curious to see where it's at. I think in terms of just like the triathlon perspective, it's like the challenge I had was like you're only training a third of that of all your training. Yeah. So it's like for me now getting into just road cycling, it's like it's 100% of the training, which I love because it's like that was always my favorite part, But I'm like, to me, I'm like I'm doing a lot more volume than I ever did in January of compared to last year or when I was doing tri stuff before. So it's like I'm getting used to that rhythm of being like, hey, I'm not also running and swimming, and it's like I'm going to see bigger gains in my cycling just from the fact that I'm spending all my time doing it versus when I was like, I might see little gains, but it's like, well, I'm also trying to see little gains in my run, in my swim. And so, yeah, I'm excited. We'll be filming it. And
so do you have a pacing goal then?
Yeah, I want to start that first. So the way I'm going to try and approach the 2x8s is I'm going to try and hold a steady power for the first 4 minutes. And then after that,
do you have a number in your mind?
Yeah. Super top secret. So it's probably like 500 or something. No, I'm just kidding. The goal for me is to try and hold steady, consistent, like a high and steady for 4 minutes. And then if I feel like I can push it a little bit, I'm going to try and increase it a little bit. Now, if I can't, then I'm going to try and hold that power as consistently as possible. Or if I feel like I'm a little too high here, I need to dial it down just a bit.
So are you going purely off feel, or do you have a number in your mind?
Yeah, I'm going to start out with like 300. So I'm going to try out with like 300 and see how I feel for the first 4 minutes and then adjust accordingly.
Okay.
And I think from that, if I feel like I can increase it, great, I'll do it a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to try and be like, I can do like 350. I'm like, no, that's stupid. I'm not going to be able to hold that for the second interval.
Yeah.
So I want to try and increase a little bit, but then I'm going to dial it back down if I feel like, hey, you know what? I'm a little bit, I'm feeling this. I'll measure my heart rate. I think that's going to be the key indicator for me is being like, hey, I want to measure my heart rate in this to see if I'm dipping into my high intensity. I'm like, I need to make sure I'm not going too hard on this first interval because I really want to make sure that like my number, when at the intervals should be roughly the same. So the second interval, like let's say I have to dial it back down. I start out at 300 and then I come back down a little bit. If I felt like I could not have increased that at the end, so let's say I dip back down to like 290, 280, right? The second interval, now I want to take that 280 or 290 and then start with that number. Go for 4 minutes and adjust accordingly.
Okay.
So that's kind of the pacing strategy I have. But the most important thing is to try and be as consistent as possible and not go too hard because that's my default is like, I will feel good. I will feel good about this first couple minutes. And I'll like the first interval, I'll be like, yeah, I can go harder than this. And you're just like, wait. you gotta keep this consistent. So
I think what you've got going good is you have a plan.
Yeah.
I don't think I really did a good job of planning. Like listening to your plan, I'm like, that's really good. I should do something like that.
Yeah.
Two,
next time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is not going to be the only 2x8 test we do.
Yeah.
I think you have a really good plan. Also, I would say I could be wrong, which is fine. I feel like where I get myself in trouble is by coming in too hot. I just for that first 30 seconds just like force the pedals. And then it's like hitting, man. Yeah, and it's hitting something stupid. I'm like, oh, now I got to back down. So I would almost say use that first 30, 40 seconds to ease in. Like, don't like, I think where I get in trouble because it's not like an erg mode thing. Yeah. You're switching the gears. So it's like, okay, I'm in this easy gear spinning. Okay, click, 3 shifts. And then it's like, I should have like more sequentially gone slower through the gears for 20, 30 seconds rather than just shift 3 times into that big gear and just try to hammer it. That I think drained probably unnecessary effort or wasted effort.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is, so I want to talk about the ramp 20-minute test as well, but like I've never done the ramp. Tell me about your experience with the ramp, and I think just for anybody who hasn't done one, just give a high level overview of like what does a ramp test consist of, and then I want to hear your perspective on like the pros and cons.
So I don't know how you would do a ramp not on a smart trainer.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think you theoretically could, but that would be...
Yeah, most people are doing smart trainer.
So a ramp test is on Zwift, or I believe Trainer Road or Training Peaks or whatever app you use, where basically, I think the one in Zwift is every minute.
Yep.
Okay.
Every minute.
So every minute, the interval just progressively gets harder by 10 or 20 watts.
Yep.
And the thing about a ramp test, they're definitely much easier mentally. I would say 75% of the workout is you're sitting there thinking, this is really easy and I'm kind of bored.
Yep.
But when you hit that, like, when it turns to get hard, it just goes to a dark place really quick. Like, it goes from like, I'm feeling good to,
hello darkness, my old friend.
I am in the hurt locker and this sucks quickly. And eventually the way the ramp tests work on the virtual training programs is you just keep increasing the gears until you literally can't turn.
Yep.
Like, you just grind to a stop.
Yeah,
like,
it's weird.
You hit like, 3 whatever or whatever your highest output is, and then it's like you go like 20 seconds and then the pedals just stop turning. Like, it's awful.
Zwift just has a screen like Garmin where it just says unproductive.
Yes, it's like you go from seated and you're like, okay, this is hurt. Then it keeps increasing, like, okay, this really hurts. And then you get to the last one and you're standing and you're just like not going anywhere.
So the way I've understood it is it takes 75% of your last effort that you were able to hold for that 1 minute, right? I think that's correct, where it's like it's measured by taking that highest 1 minute power output during the test and taking that, like, times in that by like 75%.
Yeah, I don't know I know the math of the 20 minute and the 2x8. I don't know how it mathematically determines. So you just explained.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with sounds good for sure.
Well, let me ask you this. So pros and cons of this.
Yeah.
What did you like about the ramp test? What did you not like about it? Did you feel like when you did your last ramp test, did you feel like the common knock on it is that your FTP is typically inflated compared to like a 20 minute or even a 2x8?
I think the last time I did a ramp test, I didn't know it was inflated, so I felt really good about my FTP. But
yeah.
I would say,
man, it's like 400. It's amazing.
Like, man, I've gotten really strong. Best thing about the ramp test is there's way less fatigue after the test on the body. So you do a 20-minute test, you do a 2x8 test. It's like doing an interval session where it's like that's your workout, like the whole test and the warm up and all that. Where a ramp test, you could just hop on and do one and then still go do a zone 2 ride or whatever and be fine. Be like, okay, I did the test and I'm going to go ride 20 miles or something.
Yeah.
Definitely more convenient, definitely quicker. I think a ramp test is
quicker.
More than 20 minutes.
Yep.
And that's 75% of that is easy riding.
Yep.
This is funny because earlier you kind of challenged me. You said, hey, like, we're going to talk about ramp tests and try to research some stuff that you don't know and find some good sources. And I'm like, I thought about the difference between you and I was like, okay, I know Josh is going to find like the most credible, like well-researched source. And I went straight to the people. I went to Reddit and weight weenies. Because I was like, hey, the truth is going to be in the pudding of what people perceive. And for the most part, all the comments I kept reading was my FTP was inflated, my FTP was inflated.
Yep.
There was a couple outliers of this was the most accurate
They just
test.
like their number. That's
Dude,
why.
there was one. This is really funny that we're talking about this because my YouTube algorithm this week, I came across this video and it just kind of fell into my algorithm. And I'm not going to name too specific, but there was this guy and he did a ramp test.
Yeah.
And then he was like, basically the premise of the video was, I'm going to do a ramp test, and I'm going to go into erg mode and set that as my FTP and see if I can hold it for an hour. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's interesting.
Like that.
That's an interesting.
That's an interesting video.
That's an interesting 8-minute video that I'll watch. And so he did his ramp test, and it was like 290s somewhere in there.
Yep.
So he sets his FTP at that, and he's talking about it, and he made it 41 minutes.
Oh,
and then
but
he had to
not the
bail.
whole hour. Yep.
And then, but then he's talking, and where I got really frustrated was he started saying a bunch of reasons why he couldn't hold the extra 19 minutes. He was, he did some workouts that day, or swam, or did some fatiguing stuff. But I just kind of thought, even if you weren't 100% fresh, I think you didn't hold it for an hour or close to, because that realistically is not your FTP.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's not like a criticism. It's just, I think that the ramp can be a little, especially I've heard the ramp can kind of, if you're an anaerobic guy that can have a really high horsepower sprint, it's probably going to bring that number up.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think is the common knock on it, and this is one of the cons of it, is typically people with higher anaerobic capacity can do
That's the
better.
in the red.
Yep, you're
sprint.
in the red,
Okay.
higher intensity, right? So everybody has a different anaerobic capacity as well as an aerobic, right? Based on our training, based on our DNA, all the things. But like the thing that I think the challenge with the ramp test is you're not doing a blowout, right? You're not doing this 5-minute blowout that you're going to do on the 20-minute test to where you're trying to you're tapping into your anaerobic capacity to say, hey, like you're going to use some of that energy and it shouldn't reflect on your 20-minute test.
Yes.
You're getting some of that out at the beginning before the 20 minutes. So the challenge with the ramp is like you don't have that. So the challenge or the problem is because you start to gradually increase, it's like you're not dipping into your anaerobic capacity until a much higher level.
At the end.
And
that's what it's measuring it off of.
That's what it's measuring off of. So it's like it inflates it. And I think that's one of the most common cons. However, when I was researching this, I think it's one of the things that I was, that's kind of the most common knock to it, right? A little bit higher inflated FTP. I think the best thing you can do with that, though, is like exactly what you're saying, where it's like, go test it on your zones. If you feel like it's accurate, go test it on your zones. Great. If it's true, then awesome. Then you got a great reflection of your ramp test. Awesome. That's perfect. The knock on it is if you can't hold your zones after your ramp test is inflated. So it's like, that's fine. Just adjust accordingly. But it's not the end all be all. But it's like, I think one of the things I found that I was actually like encouraged by this is like, kind of like, I think these are really good. If you've never done an FTP test, this is a great beginner FTP test because you don't have to worry about pacing like you would in the 20-minute or even the 2x8. It's like, and I think the other thing is like those who prefer like a mentally less taxing test, great. Do this one. This one's going to get you a pretty close measurement of it. I would say accurate, but it's like get you in that ballpark, right? And then it's like the other thing is like if you really like the idea of being like, hey, I want to do an FTP test, but I don't want to like go really, really hard and like, have to have these multiple days of recovery. It's like, do the ramp test then, because it's going to be less taxing. So it's like there are pros to this, and I was like, I think not historically, I've only thought about this for like the last couple of years, but I'm like, that's the most common knocks I've heard on it, where all the inflated. And I'm like, you know what though, there is some benefit, there is some value, and I don't think it's like if you're taking a ramp test, it's like great, but then just measure it with your zones. I
definitely think it's a good entry point.
Yeah.
To someone who,
like if you're intimidated by the 20-minute. Do the ramp. Yeah.
And even in Zwift, and I don't want to get into this, but there is a short 20-minute and there's a long 20-minute test.
Yep, correct.
But I would say for the ramp test, it's a good entry point to just, I'm thinking someone who's, okay, I've got a bike and I'm going to buy a trainer and try to ride in the winter now. Like that, I feel like a lot of the recreational to racer transition is that commitment to, I don't want to just recreationally ride in the warm months. I want to start training year round. So like, I'm thinking of the rider, like myself, this was me 3-4 years ago, got the smart trainer and it's like, I'm going to train in the winter.
Yep.
And I don't have a workout training regimen yet or any of that, but the fact that I'm doing miles in the winter is going to help me elevate my game. So I definitely think a ramp test is perfect for that person who gets their first smart trainer and is like, I don't know, I haven't really rode much. Just see where you're at.
Yeah.
Just get that unit of measurement.
Well, and what I would love to hear from you guys is if you've done ramp tests, tell us how it felt for you. Were your FTP numbers inflated? Did you feel like it was accurate? Or did you think, man, I don't know, this is a little bit high for me. I'd love to hear what you guys think in terms of your ramp test experience, especially as I've never done one. I can't really knock it that much. I only have just read all these different things that kind of say the same thing. So But what I have done is the 20-minute test. And so I want to get into that just for a few minutes where it's like, to me, if you're thinking about an FTP test and you want to get arguably the most accurate without doing a lactate threshold test, the 20-minute test is going to be your jam. This is essentially like how it works is like, it's pretty simple, right? What you mentioned with the 2x8. There, of course, there's going to be a warm up, there's going to be a cool down, all the things. It's going to take you longer. But in terms of what's interesting about this one is kind of what I mentioned before. It's like there is a 5-minute blowout. So it's like before you even do your 20-minute, I didn't realize it, but before I took my first one, I was like, dude, I'm actually doing hard intervals I'm doing the hard intensity for 25 minutes, not 20 minutes. It's like nobody's told me this.
I think it's this inside joke with cyclists where they just say, oh, a 20-minute test, just go right hard. Nobody tells you about that 5-minute blow up
sneaks
where
up
you're
on
like,
you. It's like a punch in the face and you're just like, dude, you know what? I'm already a little bit tired and now I'm pissed off.
I'm dripping sweat on the bike already. My legs already hurt and I haven't gotten to the actual test.
And this number won't even reflect in the 20-minute test. So I think the best thing for part of that is it does obviously reduce your anaerobic energy, which is great because then it gives you more accurate during your 20-minute. Of course, the 20-minute is just truly whatever you can hold for 20 minutes. It takes that average and then you multiply that by 95%, or you take the 95% of that average, right? Pretty simple, right? So for me, my problem historically was just pacing it. It's not really, like mentally, you get 5-10 minutes into it and you're just like, all right, I'm here. I'm just going to suffer through this. You're just holding on. But it's like, it does mentally, it's a pretty taxing thing and it's hard on your body. And I think that like the pros of this is obviously it gives you a pretty good reflection of it. I've always felt like mine are really accurate in terms of like my zones, where I'm like, yep, this is what my zones are. When I do them, I'm like, yep, this is exactly where I'm at right now. I think the only con to this is really just, it is one of those to where it can be challenging if you're not really good at pacing. Yeah. Where it's like, I think that's the big challenge with it. It's like, and I would say that like, you know, this would be a test that like, if you mentally build up this anxiety around it, or if you just have done this multiple times and every single time you're struggling with the pacing, it's like 20-minute test might not be the right test for you. Like there's other tests out there obviously that you can do. I would just say that this 20-minute test is one of those that, might just not be the best. But in terms of who it's good for, who I think it's best for, it's like, I think these are more like, hey, you know, these are, you're a cyclist who cares about like, hey, I want to try and get the most accurate result. I think you're okay with trying to figure out the pacing of it. And I think you're, you know, the athletes who are kind of preparing for more longer sustained efforts. I think of like time trialing, you know, where I'm like, we'll do a little bit of that in our race season, but it's like, this is a great measurement of that. Cause it's like, when you're doing time trialing, you should be holding a very steady power. Like you're not worried about all these surges and all these things. It's like, you should arguably be holding a pretty consistent power the whole time. So, I'm a big fan of them. I think those are like, if you had to pick them, I would say to me, it would be the 20-minute long and the 2x8 are really good, where it's like, those are going to give you really great accurate results. Kind of pick your preference there, your style. I think the second tier would be the ramp test, where I'm like, that would be where it's like, hey, a little bit more entry level, a little bit more beginner, a little bit less intimidating, but maybe those numbers might not be quite as accurate as the other two. But what I do want to ask you about, because you just did a lactate threshold test. I did. And this is where it's like, and if you know that you know it, but it's like, there is a king of all these tests. Yeah. And I just want to hear from your perspective. I've done a lactate test. I know you just did one like not a couple months ago, but it's like, man, I think for those that have never heard of a lactate threshold test, or even just that lactate test in general, like what is it? Why is it considered like the gold standard? And I'd just love to hear kind of your experience with it. Yeah. So a lactate test, it's going to, when I talk about it, it's going to sound a lot like a ramp test, but it's not. So the main difference is in a ramp test, you are ramping up every minute to where you cannot turn the pedals anymore. Where a lactate test, you're ramping up every 3 minutes, 20 watts, to where, not that you can't turn the pedals anymore, but where you physically feel like I have nothing left. So you could push the pedals down more. They're not going to lock out on you. Like you're not going to hit that kind of wattage, but you get to a point where, similarly in the ramp test, in the sense of it gets dark really quick. So
The way the lactate,
I love the way you're describing that.
it gets horrible. Like
I go to a dark place real quick.
It just
2 minutes in,
you
I'm
just
in a
go
dark place.
into the pain quickly, and you're like, and like even when we did it, like Derek was doing his, and I was standing next to him, and I was talking to him, and we were having a conversation. And I walked away for 2 minutes, and I walked back, and then all of a sudden he's like, looks like he's about to die. And I'm like, I literally was just talking to you. Like, what the heck? Yeah. So once you go past your lactate, it runs out quick. So the basic, how it works is you start at like, I think like 100 watts, and every 3 minutes he would increase my watt output by 20 watts.
Yep.
And once I got to a range where it was like, I think my threshold is this number, probably 5-6 minutes before I got to that, he would prick my finger and take my blood lactate levels, my millimoles. And so what the doctor who performed the test, what he explained to me is when you get to 4,
it's kind of your tipping point.
Millimoles per liter or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
4 was the number they told me. That's your lactate number.
Yeah.
And then even once you go past that, that's when you really start kind of burning the match at both ends. So that's why I was a little discouraged by my 2x8 test, because my lactate test, which apparently because you're taking your blood samples, it's the gold standard of the most accurate test.
Yeah, it's measuring your physiological response to that exercise, where it's like that is the truest measurement, because you're literally taking it out of your your body. And so it's like, and yeah, so that is why.
And that's what the pros do now. They'll ride up a mountain, and then they'll
get
prick their ear, their finger, take a sample, and then go do another interval, and that's how they test them. And so
if you love getting pricked, lactate test is for you.
That's for you. So my lactate results was 260 watts.
Yep.
Was my theoretical threshold. So that's why I was discouraged by this 2x8 test, because my number went down. It averaged out to like 253. Now, the lactate test, you're going, like I said, and then it's easy for the first 25 minutes. And then once you get past your blood level of 4, your lactate, it starts to get significantly harder, to where when I stopped, I was like, okay. Like I told Derek this, like, how do you feel? And I was like, I think I could have done one more set, but I know I would have thrown up in the garbage can. Like, it was like, I am, if I continue what I'm doing, I'm about 60 seconds away from vomiting in a can. Like, I knew it. And that's how I knew, like, I'm done. And the doctor even explained to me, he's like, you could have done one more set and it would not have increased or changed your number. Yeah. Because once I see 4 and I have the data trend,
you see this big spike.
Yeah, you see, he's like, I saw your spike and there it is. And he's like, and I knew you wouldn't be able to go much longer because I already got the level of 4, and that's what we're looking for. So,
and that's where, to like, the pros of this is like, because you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing in terms of like measuring that for you, because you could do it by yourself, but the problem you're going to run into is sweat.
Yeah.
And you don't want that to get into when you're pricking your finger.
I even had a doctor doing it, and I still had one test that wasn't, like, it got sweat in there and it was a faulty test.
But you need somebody that, like, the reason this is the gold standard is like because this is the most accurate, and it's also, you have somebody who's literally measuring this precise amount where you're like looking at that tipping point and be like, yep, this is it. That's it for you. So it's like, it's that idea of like, you're getting that, it offers insights even beyond the FTP, where it's like your clearance rates and like relationship between power and lactate levels. Like, it's awesome. To me, it's like, I think the challenge though with it is like, for a lot of people, if maybe you've been curious about a lactate threshold test, but you're like, the problem is like, it does require blood sampling, like
scheduling an appointment,
paying somebody, it's like, it's not crazy expensive, but I'm like $50, $60, $70 might be more. I mean, some of the ones that we've done, it's like maybe we even got a discount. So I'm like, maybe we might even get one for cheaper than I thought. But it's like, and it's also time consuming too. It's like, it takes a while. So it's like, it's one of those things to where it's like, when we did ours the last time, it's like, it was multiple. I mean, we had 3 people there, but it's like we were there for a while. And I think to me, those are easy knocks on it, where you're like, it's the best accurate measure, but I'm like, could you get this almost a similar result with the 20-minute or the 2x8? You can get pretty dang close. if you're a coach and if you really are getting into racing where you're like, you really, really care about this, do the lactate test. This is going to be the most accurate measure. There is no like, well, it's a little bit gray, type of thing. It's like, no, this is literally like your physiological measurement of it. So I think there's a lot of pros to it. I think the cons are pretty, to me, it's also like, I could see a lot of people that would turn off and be like, dude, no, that sounds ridiculous. I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
and I don't love getting pricked.
let me throw this out there. I would agree with you 100% that I don't think that you need to go get and pay for a lactate test.
Yeah.
Are serious people going to do that? Sure. Is that their right to do that? Absolutely. I would say, looking at all three of the tests we talked about, with like exception of the lactate, looking at the 20-minute, the 2x8, and the ramp. Here's who I would say they're for, and I would say when to do them. I think that's a key thing too, of when to do these tests. So let's start with when to do them.
Yep.
I would say if you are just a recreational rider and you are not racing, do them once a quarter. Do them 4 times a year, just to kind of see your seasonal fitness. I think some people come out of the winter, they hit the weekends where it's warmer, they want to see if there's fitness, or hey, I've been doing this Tuesday Night Worlds ride and want to gauge my fitness. Am I getting better? So do them once a quarter, right? Now, if you're racing, I would say do them before a training block to get your training zone numbers, because that's ultimately what you're trying to find is where do I measure so I can set my zones so I can achieve the correct workouts. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have an FTP that you're going off of last year when you were in shape in the summer, starting the winter when you've been off the bike for 2 months. And because if you're trying to do a zone 3 tempo, you're not going to be at zone 3. You're going to be more at your threshold, right? So definitely at the beginning of a block. And then I would say, what do you think?
Well, I think the second thing is when your numbers change, or when you feel like your zones have changed. So it's that second.
If they feel like they're getting easier.
Where you're like, hey, this power to me, when I've done this 2 months ago, feels way easier. My zone 2 has felt way easier than it was 2 months ago. So I think the second thing to your point is like when you feel like your zones have shifted. That's a great time to test.
And then I would say, if you're coming off a training block or switching to like maybe a focal point of a type of race where I did a time trial and I'm going to try to do crits or something, kind of want to see where my fitness is, or a road race.
Sure.
So you've just come off a block of training or you've come off of peak fitness. Measure it then.
I would think the other thing is like and you're saying coming off it, I would also say that like for those that are getting into peak shape, measure it then too, especially for racing where you're like, so I agree with you where it's like, I think 1 is when you're starting a new training block, 2 is like when you feel like your zones change, and 3 is like when you're in peak form. That's an ideal time to test, because then you're like, hey, I know exactly what this is going into some of these races or race season. So.
And then I would add on to that as far as which ones to do. If you are new to anything, start with the ramp. Just try it. Recognize that your number might be a little high.
Right.
If you get into some intervals and pacing and training, go for the 2x8. And then I would say if your focus is, I really want to try to race, I want to try to hold effort, try the 20-minute. Like that, I think that would be a good sequential way to work up towards that 20-minute. And then for me, I told Derek this, I'm like, man, I almost don't even want to do the 20-minute. I just want to go hop on the Alp on Zwift and just climb that thing. And because that's like a 45-minute climb, and it's like, that's going to give me a great measurement. There is a new climb in Zwift where it auto-calculates your FTP. Have you heard of this?
Yeah,
I haven't tried it yet.
I never tried it.
It's like a 20-minute climb, and they're like, it does a really good job. So I haven't tried it yet.
I'd be curious to see the people review this.
I want to try it.
If you've done it, actually, that'd be a good thing to throw into the comments, because I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. So let's get into some questions and answers, and I think we had a lot of people last week that really chimed in. So. We had Cam Van Huss, who mentioned that like training this winter season, pushing myself to get better, the purpose is to hang in with the Tuesday night rides and not get dropped. And erg mode, when we dived into erg mode last week, is really helping me dig deeper. And I would just say that, it's super great. And especially as like, if the Tuesday night rides, I'm assuming he's local. So it's like, we have this ride, Tuesday Night Worlds, where it's like, it's a fast group. But if the goal is to like, hey, you're pushing yourself to hang in there, not get dropped, I love that. That's awesome. Daniel Punt mentioned that you guys seem really chill. We're super chill. I'm a recreational rider who found a love of cycling through losing weight. Zwift is the best way for me to ride in zone 2. Hard to ride perfectly flat, where he's in an area in UK, sitting in on Zwift, dialing in that power, tapping away that slay the spire and dream of spring. And I could not relate more to dreaming of spring, especially our winter weather that we've been having in Cincinnati. It just, it's like,
I love this guy.
Yeah.
I love how he started with losing weight too, because that was kind of a part of my cycling story that I didn't go into, but I got 50 pounds up from when I was a high school runner.
Dude.
And then, so I lost like 30 of cycling weight. So I'd be curious to kind of hear his story on that, of either how much he lost or how he went about that with cycling. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And then Southern Cyclist mentioned, I like erg mode, makes you push the watts even if your cadence drop. To me, it's harder. I think he's referencing harder than just the pedals. I
think, he's probably referencing erg mode through the trainer.
Yeah, then erg mode through the pedal.
I've still been debating our coach about this week.
Hot topic.
It's been a hot topic for us.
And then Gary mentioned, hey, he's new to training as a cyclist. This is his second year. He's been really training, been tooling and doing with some of the zone 2 work and tempo work without erg mode to work on perceived efforts of the zones. So he's going by feel, hoping to do this in higher zones as well, essentially to the idea of like trying to have a really good feel when I'm assuming where he's going with this is like doing this outside, so that when you're doing this outside, it's like, obviously you don't have erg mode on your pedals. So it's like, and if you don't have a power meter, it's like you're not even measuring that. But when you can measure that based on your feel and hey, this is exactly what it feels like on the trainer, boom. Then it's like, and obviously if you have a power meter, heart rate, that's going to get you there. But
that's definitely something that I'm excited to focus on this year when it warms up here in the next few weeks, is trying to do actual zone 2 rides and not blow up on a hill. Yeah. And be disciplined in group rides.
Yeah. Dude, 100%. All right. Well, we really want to hear from you guys. We had such a great response last week that we would love to hear your guys' experience with FTP test. Everybody probably has some experience with some of these, and if you haven't, you probably will as a cyclist. And so we'd really love to hear from you guys. Like, what has your experience been with, if you've done the ramp, if you've done the 20-minute, if you've done the 2x8, or even if you've done the lactate threshold test? Like, what has it been your experience? Which one do you like the best? We would love to hear, maybe you agree or disagree with us on our takes on this.
Can I throw a challenge out there?
Yes.
I want to hear, because I want to hear the horror stories.
Ooh,
what is your worst experience with any of those tests where you're just like, this went horribly wrong for me? Like, those are the stories I want to hear. So
you know what? I really love that. Give us your horror stories, and we're going to share them next week on the pod. But until then, we will see you guys.
See you.